If my brain was a pocket, my thoughts would be a compact ball of lint and tangled up headphone wires. At first, I was going to make this an analytical part 2 of my last fantastical mech design video, but then, after giving it some more thought, I decided that it'd just be needlessly beating a dead horse. And after reading some of the comments on that and the other video about warp guns and rewatching my own older mech tech design series for inspiration, I decided instead to give my inner child another chance to come out and play, as well as to fix a glaring weak point in my original void cannon design. And here are the results. To get that second point out of the way first, somebody reminded me on the aforementioned video that wormholes, insofar as they're understood by our real physics, require a reception anchor be present at the target destination. Otherwise, they'll simply open onto some random point in space. How this fact could have slipped my mind, I don't know, but luckily it doesn't really matter, since I was already thinking of an alternative concept for the VCV-2. What if, instead of trying to send a kinetic or explosive payload via a warp space channel, we simply use the warp bubble itself as the ammunition? I don't usually do this, as I think it should go without saying, but very quickly I'd like to preface this with a disclaimer, as should hopefully be obvious. I'm not an engineer, a soldier, a rocket scientist, or any form of physicist, and I therefore claim no form of expertise in any of the relevant fields. I am what the YouTuber sphere has affectionately dubbed a professional idiot, which basically means I get paid to say dumb shit on camera. So if I say something that is objectively false, feel free to correct me in the comments. Now, having said all that, I think the notion of a void gun has a great deal more potential than most sci-fi authors give it credit for. Assuming, of course, the setting can provide a suitably generous power source for the thing, a warp-capable animagon armed with a void cannon would be a nigh unstoppable super predator. The absolute pinnacle of the hero machine, akin to such fictional beasts as the Batmobile, Knight Rider, the Gunstar, or Quinjet. Even more so if paired with the inherently greater versatility of an android platform and given the assistance of a purpose-built onboard AI construct. For those who don't know, Animegon is my personally constructed term for all Gundam-style Magitech super robots. And I say Magitech in this instance because what I'm about to propose is so far beyond our current understandings of science and technology that were one to show up on a modern battlefield, its operations would appear nigh unto magical, as its effects would seem to proceed from zero causes, such as the colloquial definition of the term magic. Now, as I've already covered pretty much all the most basic elements of futuristic mech tech and design philosophy, both realistic and fantastical, as well as these more recent additions like warp drives, energy shields, energy weapons, and even AI elsewhere on this channel, and since I'm not yet in the business of grinding my old records smooth, this video is essentially going to be the final compilation of both my mech tech and mech design series, or possibly one of two, depending on if I feel like doing a more down-to-earth version as well or not. But for the time being, let's get down to brass tacks. Remembering what I said a minute ago about wormholes needing a pre-existing tether at the destination to be of any practical use whatsoever, perhaps a better use would be as a hyperluminal particle accelerator. Obviously, as anyone with even a cursory knowledge of the standard model of particle physics will tell you, gravity, that is the topographical warping of spacetime by a concentrated well of energy, aka mass, is the second weakest of the four fundamental forces next to the eponymously named weak nuclear force, which is why, in order to have any perceptible effect, one needs a particularly massive object like a star or a black hole. And even if you were inclined to carry such things around in your pockets, the effects fall off exponentially with distance, which makes its potential use as a missile weapon exceedingly dubious, to say the very least. But a weapons platform, such as a mech, or even a regular style of space-capable gunship or starfighter, able to make precise tactical use of its superluminal capabilities, could easily negate these limitations by effectively teleporting right next to the enemy craft, potentially even inside its shields, depending on their type and/or strength. Then using a short-range warp ripper, think Jaws of Life, but instead of mechanical steel shears, its blades are made of the plastic substance of reality itself, to tear through the shields and hull armor of an enemy battleship, which, remember from last time, would need to be at least strong enough to survive regular impacts from hypersonic micrometeors, creating an opening for the destructive ordnance to be deposited the good old-fashioned way. But the problem you'll notice is the question. Why would someone use mechs for this task rather than autonomous drones or missiles equipped with the same omnidirectional warp tech? And this is where I need to address the original impetus for this video. Someone in the comments of the last mech video said that, and I quote, "Militaries don't care about vulnerabilities. They can cover those with other assets. They care about capabilities," unquote. And with that in mind, Let us check and see what our hypothetical mech can do that, say, a Syndrome Omnidroid, Gunstar-style starfighter, or an HMP droid gunship could not. To understand that, we must first analyze why I chose those 3 specific points for comparison. You see, anyone who's familiar with the art of combat in any capacity whatsoever will know that position and timing are the keys to victory on any scale, and that having a controlling share of both is the fulcrum upon which the outcome of any given engagement is decided. In essence, being in the right place at the right time to maximally exploit the enemy's weaknesses while preventing the enemy from doing the same in return. And of course, having the option to disengage or withdraw at a moment of your choosing is paramount to not getting sucked down a terminal vortex should your original plan fall during initial contact, as they are infamously wont to do. Therefore, the question we're left asking is, what real advantages does a manned humanoid mech have in regards to its agility and flexibility? In other words, what can they do that their contenders can't that justifies their increased costs and liabilities? To answer this, let's examine a hypothetical scenario. We have 4 interstellar factions, each equipped with some version of my multi-jump omnilinear nucleic impulse resonator. For scientific interests, we'll say the only meaningful difference between the combatants is that one faction straps their Mjolnir drive to an AI-piloted gunship, another uses a fully mechanized octopod, the third utilizes a manned Gunstar, and the fourth sends a piloted Animegon. Which one has the advantage? By which I mean which one has the greatest ability to liability ratio. And here's where we must again grapple with the stubborn elephant in the room. Barring the existence of some existential plane, field, or entity that only biology can tap into that bridges the ability gap, the best argument I've been able to conjure for why you would use a squishy meat sack for your mech's motivational nexus rather than an artificial analog, or even just a fully excised human brain in a jar, is that a machine, no matter how advanced, is ultimately going to suffer from what I've chosen to call writer's cap. Similar to writer's block, only instead of describing the temporary incapacity to write in general, it refers to the specific permanent inability of an individual to create something more intelligent, competent, nuanced, or sophisticated than themselves. I've come to realize that this fact applies not just to all of creation, but to everything that has a causal origin, i.e., the potential complexity of any pattern is ultimately limited by the complexity of its component patterns. Just like how energy cannot be created or destroyed, complexity also cannot be conjured out of nowhere. Of course, the latchkey term of that idea is potential, and as anyone who's ever had the misfortune of having to look after other people's kids will tell you, having great potential and actually being great are so far removed even in principle they couldn't be found on the same star chart. To understand this, let's look at an illustrative example. In the Teen Titans episode Only Human, Cyborg gets roped into an arena-style duel against a giant robot called Atlas. Predictably, since Atlas has the superior tech, being stronger, tougher, faster, etc., he dominates in their initial bouts. That is, until Cyborg's human half kicks in, allowing him to surpass his formerly supposed limits, beating Atlas and teaching kids a valuable lesson about never giving up on themselves. But here's the problem. Strength is determined by an actuator's power density, i.e., how much usable energy can be stored in a given amount of mass. This is true for both an organic muscle and a hydraulic press, meaning that the absolute limit of how much force either can exert is not a mystical, obscure construct, but a hard and fast wall imposed upon it by physics, meaning that if you're able to surpass it, then it wasn't really your maximum cap in the first place. And since the human brain is subject to all the same pesky physical laws as the muscles, the same absolute standard applies to our thoughts. Imagine it like an empty jar. The actual limit of how much stuff that jar can hold is fixed, as only so much mass can occupy the space without shattering the glass. If you try to exceed it, the excess will simply fall out the top. However, the reason a human pilot has the potential to surpass a machine is that their potential jar is more like an elaborate glassware apparatus, with their founding animalistic limits, by which I'm referring to our innate biological imperative to survive and reproduce, being the primary burners that give free energy to the system. Meanwhile, a machine has only its unidirectional directives. In essence, go forth and multiply leaves way more room for interpretation than go kill that guy over there and blow up his base while you're at it. In other words, the human brain doesn't possess some alien magical power. Our metaphorical glassware doesn't even have fundamentally greater volume. It's just that our arrangement allows for greater variety of forms. The fluid can flow and mix in ways utterly foreign to the comparatively streamlined apparatus of the mechanical counterpart. But then, why not simply change the fundamental structure of the machine to match that of the organic progenitor? Sure, why not create a direct, superior competitor in our own evolutionary niche? I'm sure that won't have any negative repercussions for the human species whatsoever. But let's be honest. If the autistic blowhards who run our industrial complexes were capable of complex thought or long-term planning, our world would have significantly fewer problems than it does. So maybe we'll all go out in a glorious firestorm of our own devising. Or maybe we'll slowly asphyxiate on the smog of our own impotent ambitions. Either way, that's enough out of my pie hole for another day. I have no idea what I'm going to title this Frankensteinian mental mosh pit. I'll probably only end up putting Mechs in the title because that gets more engagement. Oh, and speaking of engagement, if you've made it this far and wouldn't mind doing me a solid, throw one or several of these trendy words down in the comments. You don't have to use them in a sentence or anything, but apparently they're like catnip to the algorithm strays, which, fun fact, actually mimics feline sex hormones. That's why cats can't get enough of it and why it drives them so barking mad. The more you know. Anyway, I'm gonna actually wrap this script up now. Like and subscribe. Check out my books if you have a buck or two to spare on my upkeep. And until next time, stay safe, stay sane, and remember, you can never think too much, you can only think badly. Peace be upon you.